Of course, I shouldn't give away the secret by poking at this dish. Isn't that right, Your Highness? Prince Leon cannot answer and is utterly shocked at what he hears. Ellison continues, the Empire lost control of its city due to war against the dragons. With the Emperor's power at an all-time low, the Crown Prince had to find a way to survive. Ellison put down the mud and moved the two pieces closer, and the method he chose was to spread his authority. This agitated Prince Leon. Our prince, you portray yourself as disinterested in governance, harmless. However, it is just a disguise. You are secretly assembling an army, ready to strike back at those nobles, to take back the lost throne. At this moment, Duke Porgo's face turns livid, and he angrily questions, do you know what you are talking about? But Ellison did not heed him, continuing to say, what would be the consequences if this situation continues to spread? His Highness the Prince would be stripped of his title. Porgo could no longer bear it, immediately interrupting Ellison and calling Dariant and commanding him to take control of Ellison. I want this restaurant to cease to exist nor its owner. This made Dariant very uncomfortable, wondering internally, what exactly has Ellison done? Ellison chuckled, do you think getting rid of me will solve your problem? Porgo then threatened, I suppose a man without a tongue can't speak. Seeing that Dariant hesitated to act, Porgo immediately ordered Medrin to bring Ellison to his knees. This frightened Medrin terribly, and she quickly said, Sir, I can't do that. Porgo was confused by their fear. He was unconvinced and was about to order the soldiers to take action immediately, but the prince seemed to sense something and suddenly began to devour the palenque, completely abandoning his princely demeanor. This scene stunned everyone present. What's going on? Everyone wondered internally, while the prince continued to relish the food, repeatedly praising it. You all should try it too. However, Porgo still refused to sit down. Seeing this, the prince slammed his fist on the table, roaring, sit down immediately. This was the first time Porgo saw the prince so angry, and although he did not understand what was going on behind the scenes, he began to taste the food along with the prince. After eating, the prince asked Porgo, how does it taste? Didn't it surprise you? Understanding the subtext of the prince's words, Porgo nodded. Of course, the taste is very good. It seems the conclusion is clear. If I said I wasn't amazed by such a delicious dish, then I would be lying. Congratulations, you've won the bet. Hearing this, Diran was very happy, and the prince thanked Ellison and then prepared to leave the restaurant. I had planned to stay here another day, but now that I've got the Baron of Grake's answer, it's time to return to the palace. I won't bother you anymore. Gather the first order. We'll be going back to the capital, said the prince while walking out the door. Ellison and Diran watched them exit the restaurant. Just then, Ellison released a sigh of relief. That went well. I'm glad we won the bet. Seeing this, Diran was very curious. Although I won the bet, I really don't understand what's going on. Ellison gestured to him not to worry. You don't have to understand yet. All I can tell you is that as long as I'm here, you don't have to worry about that kind of external pressure. Alright, let's eat now. We can't waste the food. On the way back, the prince's entourage was unusually quiet, the atmosphere somewhat eerie. Darian also did not understand what had happened. Feeling that something was not right, the prince suddenly broke the silence, asking Medrin, is that cook the person you mentioned? Medrin nodded, confirming, yes, he's an extremely terrifying being. The prince nodded, as expected, a person whom even nobles and knights dare not disrespect. Indeed, is a variable. Hearing this, Porgo tensed up. Even Medrin and Darian felt endangered in his presence. The prince agreed with Porgo's view. What have we done so far to increase our power? Pressuring the Templars and Medrin breathing down their necks and eliminating competition. But Prince Leon pauses as he remembers how Diran trusts the restaurant and continues the bet. If it was me in that situation, would I have continued with the bet? Porgo fell silent. Would I be able to trust my life and reputation to some peasant? But the prince already had his answer. This time, let's start from scratch. The path we have to take is more dangerous than being stuck naked on the streets. A few days later at the restaurant, Ellison felt relieved as he finally completed the construction of the barn. However, just then, a Barineric walked by and gently kicked the barn. In an instant, the entire barn collapsed into a pile of rubble. Ellison was momentarily stunned. The house I had so painstakingly built turned out to be so fragile. Ellison sighed, realizing it might be due to his lack of building knowledge. Meanwhile, Ruren curiously asked, isn't the restaurant built by you? Ellison was flustered. I only put up the sign. Of course, the contractors built the building. It looks like we need to go somewhere. This made Ruren even more puzzled. Where to? Ellison replied, to a place where the greatest building craftsman lives. Just then, the two arrived at the foot of the Miliarek Mountains. Meanwhile, the Red Dragon Serena, near her cave, sensed someone approaching and muttered discontentedly, a kindred spirit. Finally, I was bored. I'll make you realize whose territory you are trespassing on. She was excited by the arrival of outsiders, having been bored for a long time. Just as she was getting up to meet them, she accidentally stepped on a crown on the ground. The pain shot through her body, causing her to halt abruptly. Damn thing, Serena cursed. Ellison and Ruren, due to the issue with the barn construction, embarked on a journey to find a dwarven craftsman. Ruren curiously asked, can't we just find a human craftsman? Ellison shook his head and said, we need a sturdy warehouse, and in terms of construction, no one can compare to the dwarves. Are they that good? Then their village must be pretty cool. It's been a while since I visited. It's somewhere around here. They quickly reached a cave entrance, found it, but to Ellison's shock, shock. The place was completely different from his last visit, decayed and abandoned. Even the guards at the entrance were gone. Ellison's heart sank as he noticed many soldiers' skeletons scattered on the ground. Damn it, it looks like someone came here first. Just then, in an instant, Serena appeared at the cave entrance, seeing Ellison and Rurin, and scoffed. I thought someone powerful was coming, but it's just a child. What a disappointment. At that moment, Serena continued to mock an angry Ellison. A mere human dares to step into my territory? Meanwhile, Ellison calmly asked her, did you do this to the dwarves here? Serena was momentarily stunned by the question and arrogantly replied, you should at least respect a great dragon race. Answer me, you're not any better than a pest. I can see you're not in your right mind. The next second, Serena spewed a stream of dragon fire at Ellison. Rurin immediately signaled Ellison to dodge. Human magic is ineffective against dragons, but Ellison showed no intention of dodging, his eyes filled with fierce determination. He then activated a basic level 9 spell, instantly absorbing Serena's dragon fire into the barrier. Serena was dumbfounded. What the hell is going on? Before she could react, Ellison raised his hand and unleashed a powerful spell called Plasma Break that knocked the huge red dragon back several meters, even piercing through her tough scales. Are you really human? How did you? She was shocked and then thought, it must be that man, the one who killed all the red dragons single-handedly. But why are you with a black dragon? She said while she transformed into her human form. Ellison sighed softly. First, answer my earlier question. Seeing Ellison preparing to cast another spell, Serena quickly begged for mercy. It wasn't me. It was already like this when I got here. It turns out, the area was already in ruins before Serena arrived. Serena explained, that's why I haven't received any tribute. Seeing that Ellison clearly didn't believe her, she said she saw a big gate that was blocked, but she didn't get to check it herself. Ellison then asked, where did she see it? If you want to know how to get there, I can personally take you. Isn't it more interesting to be with me than with that child? Just as her words fell, Rurin, furious, delivered a dragon's kick. Ellison is mine. Serena's legs was injured again, causing her to kneel in pain. Where is it located? Ellison asked coldly. Serena trembled and pointed forward, and Rurin, seeing this scene, felt very pleased. Moments later, Ellison and Rurin arrived at the dwarven town, but it had already become ruins. Rurin, observing the marks of battle on the buildings, concluded, clearly, this was the work of dragons. Ellison nodded in agreement, but he mentioned that he couldn't yet confirm it was Serena's doing. Meanwhile, a huge iron door appeared in front of them, covered in dragon bite marks, obviously very sturdy. Just as Ellison was about to break the door, a voice suddenly came from behind it. Please go back, unlawful intruders. You are not welcome in this place. Ellison immediately asked, what exactly happened here? The dwarf paused, then angrily replied, it was a red giant dragon that destroyed this place. Upon hearing this, Rurin burst into rage. I knew it was her. That punk. Ellison grabbed Rurin to prevent her from acting impulsively. Before that, let's hear him out. He turned and asked, was it really Serena who did this? From the marks on the door, it seems like several red dragons launched the attack. Dragons, the strongest of all living beings. Ellison then whispered to Rurin that he already had a plan in mind. Rurin, puzzled, asked, what are you thinking about? Ellison smiled slightly. A peaceful solution. From the dwarf's words, they learned that the great door had been closed for a year. Ellison knew that many things had happened a year ago, and it wasn't strange for such issues to arise in this period. His biggest concern now was the dwarf's food issue. Resources were limited, and without resupply, they would eventually run out. Are you sure you won't open the door for us? Ellison asked. I say this because I want to help you, but the dwarf was very wary, seemingly unwilling to trust strangers. What if you are allies of the red dragons? This angered Rurin, who then began a furious tirade. Seeing this, Ellison helplessly covers her mouth, calmly stating, all right, we will respect your decision. At that moment, Ellison gestured for Rurin to bring over the backpack, and then he took out a frying pan. The journey back is long. We need to fill our stomachs first. The dwarves were stunned, puzzledly asking, why cook at the door of all places? Ellison began preparing lunch on his own, while Rurin took out a string of sausages from the backpack. Seeing this scene, the dwarves curiously asked, what is that? Ellison slowly explained, this is called sausage, made by stuffing minced meat and spices into casings, essential food for home travel. It only needs simple roasting to emit a rich aroma that stimulates the appetite. The scent of the sausage lingered far in the enclosed space, and the dwarves inside began to grow restless. That's true. We get to smell this delicious smell longer then. Rurin quickly understood this was exactly Ellison's plan. Ellison said to the dwarves inside the door, these items were originally brought as gifts for you, but considering the current situation, it's impossible now. However, I do want to know what exactly happened to the dwarves. Would that be too much to ask for? Seeing the dwarves still hesitating, Ellison decisively put away the sausages, took out a can of beer from his bag, and said with a smile, actually, it's a pity. I salted these sausages to preserve them as long as possible. It goes along perfectly with beer. At this moment, the dwarves were already drooling. Just then, the door that had been sealed for a year slowly opened. Ellison's lips curled up slightly, thinking, I'm really sorry. I had to resort to such measures. Looking at the sausages sizzling in the pan, the dwarves' saliva was practically dripping. Seeing this, Ellison knew their food supplies were seriously dangerously low. He smiled and cautioned, "You must be starving, but be careful not to burn yourselves." Just tasting a bite, the dwarves felt revitalized. One remarked, "Who knew we'd eat such food again?" Although it's not ideal to drink beer on an empty stomach, the dwarves have a high tolerance for alcohol, and the alcohol content did not affect them. Then, Ellison noticed a dwarf nearby and asked, "Is there a dwarf called Gultazar there?" Upon hearing this, the dwarf was startled and nervously asked, "How do you know that name?" It turned out Ellison and Gultazar were old friends, and the sausages were actually a gift for him. Moments later, Ellison was inside the dwarven cave, and observing the area, he noticed only about 20 to 30 dwarf households remained. How could they have ended up like this? Ellison wondered. Soon, Ellison reached the end of the cave. After a soldier announced his presence, a weak voice came from behind a curtain. "Come in. It's been a while." Gultazar. The speaker was the current leader of the dwarves, Gultazar. "It really has been a while." At the same time, he noticed Rurin behind Ellison, as her aura felt familiar. Seeing the leader so respectful towards Ellison, the soldiers couldn't help but be curious about their identities. Ellison straightforwardly asked, "Tell me, what exactly happened here? Why has a perfectly good dwarf settlement turned into ruins?" Gultazar paused, then finally revealed the truth. Red dragons had attacked them. Faced with a massive power disparity, only a few dwarves survived. Ellison followed up, "What are the features of those red dragons? Do they have red hair and horns that grow backward?" Gultazar, agitated, covered his forehead. "Not just one. We were attacked by a group of red dragons." Thinking of the bite marks on the door, Ellison thought, "It all seems to be true, but that makes no sense." Ellison frowned. Why would red dragons with their big egos collaborate unless something caused them to lose control? Ellison speculated that there must be something particularly enticing here to attract the red dragons. Hearing this, the soldiers were visibly shaken. Gultazar pondered for a moment, stroked his beard, then pressed a button under the table. Shortly after, a secret door appeared. "I have something to show you." Gultazar began to recount the history of the dwarves. In fact, the dwarves had been attacked by red dragons multiple times and had avoided extinction each time thanks to an ancient dragon bone, their protector. The noble and ancient dragon, Colored. When Ellison saw the dragon bone, he was also astonished. Judging by its size, this dragon was at least 5,000 years old. Before leaving, Colored entrusted its essence crystal to the dwarves. Colored had hidden its essence in this incredibly secure cave because it had the potential to give birth to a new dragon lord, a lord who could make all dragonkind submit. If these dragons unite under one commander and act together, no kingdom or mighty warrior can stop them. It can destroy the whole world, Gultazar explained. Rurin felt incredibly familiar with this essence because she had seen something similar as a child at her mother's. Later, her mother was confined by the dragon elders, and at that time she did not understand what this meant. Whenever she remembered these things, Rurin couldn't help but cry uncontrollably. Seeing her so upset, Ellison stepped forward to comfort her, softly saying, "I won't let anyone hurt you." Gultazar felt very sorry for this, saying quietly, "I'm sorry to have brought up some bad memories. This essence crystal often comes with sorrow and pain." Colored once tried to destroy it, but was unsuccessful. Just then, Ellison said to Gultazar, "I plan to build a lair in the city of Grake, and I hope you dwarves will join us there to establish a new dwarf village." Hearing this, Gultazar is stunned. "As for the essence crystal that could birth a dragon king, I'm not interested in it. This place has already been discovered by other dragons, and they could attack at any moment," Ellison said calmly. Gultazar looked back at the dragon bone, and Ellison could see the turmoil in his heart. Knowing how important home is to dwarves, Ellison decided not to force the dwarves to follow him and left the decision to Gultazar. Then, Ellison turned to Rurin, asking with concern, "Are you feeling better now?" Rurin wiped the tears from her eyes, asking, "Are we just going to leave that essence crystal unattended?" Ellison reassured her with a smile, "Don't worry, I've already cast several powerful protective spells." At this moment, Gultazar was deep in thought, unsure of what choice to make. Indeed, this place held too many memories. Just then, soldiers brought in several hot sausages, a new sight for Gultazar. The soldiers explained, "This was left by that human. The others are already eating it. I told them to wait, but they couldn't resist it." Seeing the dwarves immersed in the joy of food, Gultazar felt ashamed, as it had been a long time since he'd seen them laugh so freely. He wondered to himself, was I really wrong? This reminded Gultazar of what Colored had said when he departed. At that time, Colored had asked Gultazar, "How do you find this cramped space?" Gultazar hadn't understood Colored's meaning at the time and replied, "Sir Colored, this place might be too small for you, but for us dwarves, it's vast enough." Hearing this, Colored smiled, "I wonder how you've managed to survive." He then took out an essence, solemnly handing it to Gultazar. Colored had said to Gultazar, "But if I am no longer here one day, you will become the target of all dragons. So, when I die, please take the dwarves and leave this place." At the time, Gultazar didn't understand what Colored meant, asking, "Are we to abandon you in our homeland?" Colored waved his hand and laughed, indicating not to worry. "By then, I'll just be a pile of bones." "Don't say such things," Gultazar nervously answered. Then Colored became serious. "Listen, if no one alive remembers me in this place, it will all be meaningless. So, survive. The dead should not hold back the living. My existence is not meant to send dwarves to their demise." Gultazar didn't understand the meaning of Colored's words. "Don't you know how much you are already helping us? Seeing the dwarves' smiles reappear, Goltazar finally understood the message Colored wanted to convey as he left. He felt deeply apologetic. It was his stubbornness that had caused everyone so much suffering. Just as Ellison and Ruren were about to leave, a voice made them stop in their tracks. Ellison turned around to see that the dwarves were fully armed, ready to follow him to build a new dragon lair. "We will follow you. Please accept us." The scene shifts as the dwarves arrive at the cave Ruren had dug, solving the problem of constructing the dragon's lair. Ellison hadn't expected the dwarves to start working immediately upon arriving. Goltazar smiled at him and said, "Don't worry, although we've faced many hardships, the dwarves are still strong and capable." Then, Goltazar whispered to Ellison, "It's just that everyone was craving sausages." Ellison smiled, indicating he would take care of the food. Then, Goltazar solemnly took off the essence ring he was wearing on his hand, ready for a new beginning. Watching the busy dwarves, Ruren also felt hopeful. However, the only remaining issue was that essence crystal. Seeing this, Ellison paused and asked, "Do you want to absorb it?" Ruren, in shock, shouted, "Don't joke about this." Then she punched Ellison. "Then I'll keep it safe for now. The birth of another dragon lord is absolutely not allowed." Ellison agreed with Ruren's view and mentioned that they still had an important matter to handle. Meanwhile, Serena was still soothing her injured leg, not expecting to be so unlucky. Just then, she heard noises from afar and said, "Who is it? Is that you, Jard? Get lost. I have nothing left to tell you." But when she saw who it was, she couldn't even sit still on her throne. It turned out that Ellison and Ruren had only come to gather some information, but now they felt it was unnecessary. He asked, "You said you never received gifts, but why is your lair full of shiny things?" Serena, frustrated, didn't expect to encounter these two formidable figures. "I already told you everything earlier. Go away. Why is it always me? Who is Jard? Did you attack the dwarves' mine with Jard?" Ellison suspected she might be the one who attacked the dwarves, but Serena awkwardly revealed the truth. It turned out that Serena's ex-boyfriend often came here to see her, and she mistook him for someone else, leading to the earlier misunderstanding. Ellison was stunned and sighed. "It seems I was mistaken." Serena said she had only settled here for half a year and had never encountered a group of dragons. Ruren still remained skeptical and asked, "Then what's with these gold coins on the ground?" Serena clenched her lips and snapped her fingers, and the coins on the ground instantly vanished. "So all of these were illusions?" Ruren asked. Serena burst into tears, pleading, "If you're still not happy, just take everything here away." The two returned to the restaurant but gained nothing from the attack on the dwarves. It seems that it really had nothing to do with Serena, but luckily Ellison still had that essence crystal, which seemed to have some connection to the dragon's plans. Just then, the doorbell suddenly rang and Mr. Ment and Elena walked in. Ellison noticed that Mr. Ment's cane was missing and inquired about it. Mr. Ment nodded, thanking Elena for her help, which allowed him to get rid of the cane. "I didn't do much. His will was more impressive, which resulted in his fast recovery. Still, it's because he trusted you, just like the rest of us." Ruren just listening at the side. Then, Ellison asked about the situation at Elena's clinic, whether it was as usual. Elena happily reported that with the help of Nellen and some miners, the clinic was running very smoothly and no one dared to feign illness anymore. Ellison knew that this must have involved Mrs. Rain's participation. As they were talking, the sudden appearance of a dwarf startled Elena, who hadn't expected to see a dwarf here. Ellison was speechless and thought to himself, did they build that far already? Immediately afterward, the restaurant's main door was pushed open again. "Wooba belly," Mr. Knoll shouted, then walked in, smiling and saying, "I didn't expect everyone to be here. It looks like the restaurant is busy again." Everyone's favorite dishes were quickly served. The mushroom pizza that Mr. Ment had been longing for was finally on the table, and as he tasted a piece, he said, "I should start learning to make one from Miltine." Upon hearing this, Miltine blushed, while others enjoyed their meal, and the dwarves still liked to eat the food while drinking beer. After a busy day, Ellison could finally take a break, but only one person stood outside the window, hesitating to enter, Dyran. He didn't know how to start. Just as Dyran was about to quietly leave, the restaurant's door suddenly opened. Ellison had already sensed his presence. "Dyran, why not come in and enjoy the food with everyone?" Seeing Ellison, he nervously asks if he can make dessert as well. "Desserts? I do know how to make them." Dyran hesitated for a moment and then knelt down directly in front of Ellison. He requested Ellison's help making some desserts to make his mother smile. He was very worried that his mother might become ill, so he hoped Ellison could help make a special dessert. Just then, at the kitchen of Great Castle, Ellison was surprised to find the kitchen so large and equipped with many unexpected ingredients. Soon, he found the ingredients he needed and prepared the dessert. However, when the food was served in front of Mrs. Verna, she didn't touch it and sent it back untouched. This surprised Ellison. It was the first time in his culinary career that he had encountered such a situation. He quickly understood the reason. The stomach is an organ affected by emotions. When a person is in a bad mood, she is likely to be unable to enjoy any food. Thus, Mrs. Verna must be troubled by serious worries. Dyran also confirmed this, recalling that his mother used to love desserts the most. When Dyran was a child, Verna was a very strict mother. Since she came to Great Castle, Dyran had not seen her smile for many years. Seeing this, his father, Ridden Grake, was also very sad. At breakfast one time, time, they discovered Mrs. Verna's favorite food. Since Grake was under construction at the time, Ridden did not spend much time with Verna. He knew that Verna was also under a lot of stress, so she was very strict with Diran. But Ridden just wanted Verna to be a little happier. However, over the years, Verna never confided her feelings to Ridden, and he didn't even know what food she liked. Verna was speechless. Just then, Ridden noticed her empty plate and said that it was the first time Verna had finished all her food, so he thought she liked sweets the most. That's how Diran found out that his mother likes desserts. From that day, they ate many desserts continuously until everyone could not bear to look at sweets anymore. Eventually, Verna broke the deadlock because she too was tired of sweets. It was then that Verna finally showed a long-lost smile, which leaves Diran and his father delighted. One day, Diran accidentally overheard an argument behind the door, and out of curiosity, he eavesdropped. But the door suddenly opened and a man stormed out, sending Diran flying. At the same time, Diran recognized that the man was the Lord of Dedran City, Count Dedran. Verna reassured him not to worry because she belonged to Grake City. At the time, Diran was young and did not pay much attention to this. In the following days, Verna was still as strict as usual, but the difference was that her face often had a smile. She was happy, and the house started to feel like a normal, warm family. However, this happy time did not last long. One morning, it abruptly ended. That day, Diran was making desserts with his mother as usual, but no matter how Verna tried, the desserts were unsuccessful. Just as they were enjoying this happy time, the butler suddenly broke the idyllic scene with shocking news. The Lord was ill. This news left them at a loss. After the doctor's examination, no clear results were obtained, and even the Lord himself had trouble eating. Just as Diran turned to ask his mother, he saw an expression he would never forget in his life. His mother's face was filled with sadness, anger, and helplessness. From then on, the atmosphere in the home changed dramatically. She no longer touched any desserts Diran made for her and clearly drew a line between them. Their conversations could only be conveyed through the butler, and everything Diran did was under her surveillance. To live a peaceful life, Verna even kept her distance from Diran. Eventually, Diran encountered Ellison and others. Could the once beautiful family scene now be an unreachable dream? While walking back home, Ellison is full of doubts about this situation. Although there are many unclear aspects about the Lord's illness, it doesn't mean Verna must distance herself from Diran. Could it be because Diran is not her biological son? If that were the problem, she wouldn't have opened her heart to Diran in the first place. Although her family arranged her marriage, it looks like she truly fell in love with the Lord later, and some secrets involved may have forced her to keep her distance from Diran. Then Ellison's eyes widened. Could this be out of guilt? Moments later, Ellison immediately went to Rurin's room, which startled Rurin. She thought Ellison was there to scold her. He told her that he needed help with something, and then Ellison asked her two strange questions. If I suddenly became paralyzed and couldn't speak, would you be sad? Rurin nodded affirmatively. Then would you lose your appetite for sweets because of my condition? Ellison continued. This left Rurin stunned, and she responded, confused. Are you drunk? On the other side, Verna was carefully feeding the Lord, watching Ridden, who seemed like a vegetable. Verna's eyes also lost their sparkle. Just then, a voice interrupted her. It was the butler of Count Dedran. This gave Verna an ominous feeling. A moment later, Verna turned and left. Just as the door was closing, a teleportation portal suddenly appeared, and it was Ellison and Rurin. Immediately after, Ellison asked Rurin to see if there was a way to cure Ridden. However, after Rurin's careful examination, she didn't find any problems. So, Ellison turned his attention to a cabinet on the side of the room. Perhaps there were important clues in the room, and now they needed to figure out Mrs. Verna's real intentions. Just then, Ellison noticed that Ridden made a faint sound. He seemed to be hinting at something. When the two followed Ridden's gaze, they saw he was looking at a piano. After Rurin searched around, indeed, she found a strange scroll inside the piano. Obviously, this was an important document. When Ellison read the contents, he was surprised to find that it was proof of Verna embezzling taxes from Grake City. The document detailed how much tax money was embezzled. Even more shocking was who wrote it. Immediately after, Ellison signaled to Rurin, you need to make a trip to the imperial capital now. Go there and bring one person back. Meanwhile, on the other side, Verna had gone to Count Dedran's room. Dedran was not only the Lord of Dedran City, but also had another identity. He was Verna's father. After Ellison obtained the scroll of Count Dedran's crimes, he found Diran. He then gave the scroll to Diran. When Diran opened the document, his face was full of shock. It recorded evidence of Verna stealing taxes from Grake City, and all these funds had gone into Count Dedran's pocket. Ellison then signaled him to keep quiet since Count Dedran is in the castle. At this moment, Diran understood that this was why his mother had been avoiding him, but he didn't understand who had written this record. Ellison then had him look at the signature at the end of the document. Diran could hardly believe his eyes. The confession was written by Mrs. Verna herself, but he didn't understand why she would do this. Once discovered by the Empire, she would not escape legal punishment. Ellison then cast a spell that he only used in dire situations. We can find out from now then. On the other side, Count Dedran greeted Verna with a smug look, but Verna did not want to talk to him. Count Dedran had never really treated Verna as his daughter. His smile was like a knife hidden hidden behind his laughter. Then, he suddenly changed the topic and said, "I heard Dairan welcomed His Highness the Prince and others. It seems he is a very brave child. This is quite different from what some people have told me." Hearing this, Verna had a bad feeling. It turned out that Dedran had been having people monitor Dairan's every move. Now, seeing Dairan growing up, he felt very annoyed. "Does this mean I should make him like Ridden?" Dedran said coldly. This statement was clearly not a consultation with Verna, but a notification. "What?" Verna asked while suppressing her anger. Then Dedran laughed. "You didn't know, did you? It's something I did without telling you." Then she looked at Verna with a crazy smile. "I'm the one who made Ridden ill by poisoning him. I'm planning on doing the same to Dairan." Hearing this, Verna was furious to the extreme. She had never thought that her own biological father would be so cruel, not even sparing his own grandson. Just then, a butler sneaks at her back, holding a rope. "I didn't ask for your opinion." Through a magical sound transmission, Ellison heard Dedran's plot clearly. Mrs. Verna had written this confession intending to go down together with Dedran, but at this moment, Dairan could do nothing, and in his urgency, he planned to summon the army to attack Dedran. Seeing this, Ellison immediately stopped him. "Under the current circumstances, no one will obey your orders. Dedran's people have already infiltrated the castle. Can you really trust the soldiers in this castle?" And Mrs. Verna was still in their hands, and Dedran would not be foolish enough to carry poison on him. "So, even if you catch him, it will be hard to prove that the poison was his doing. If this evidence is handed over, Mrs. Verna will also be implicated. Then what can I do? We need to create new evidence and find a powerful and influential person to provide reliable testimony." Just then, Rurin comes back using a portal and brings Madrine. "This is the one, right?" When Dairan saw Madrine, he was also surprised, and this was exactly Ellison's plan. Next, it was showtime. The next day, Mrs. Verna was already under the control of Count Dedran, and now they had to go somewhere. Verna didn't understand. She had done everything her father asked, but why wouldn't he let Dairan go? This made Dedran laugh. "How could I possibly ignore a huge threat? I was planning to wait until you had an heir before deciding to act, but after waiting so long, nothing happened. So, I decided to kill everyone and then annex Grake City." Just then, Dedran grabbed her hair, then looked down at her. "It seems like you already knew I was the one who poisoned Ridden, right? Learn some acting, would you? You should have had a more surprised look when I told you I poisoned him." Then she threw her onto the floor. At this moment, Verna was desperately pleading with her father to spare Dairan. But how could her father agree? "His breakfast has already been poisoned," Dedran said while opening Dairan's door. When Verna saw Dairan's lifeless eyes, her heart nearly broke, and she never expected it would end this way. "You are a monster." Then tears began dropping. "I'm so disgusted to share the same blood with you." Tears streamed down her cheeks, unchecked and relentless. Meanwhile, a soldier handed a document to the Count, who was curious about it. But when he saw the contents, he broke into a sweat. The document detailed all the embezzled tax records that Verna had kept, but now she had no chance. Dedran looked at the document and laughed heartily, feeling as if even the heavens were helping him. As long as this evidence disappeared from the world, no one could prove his crimes. In despair, she killed her husband and son, and then committed suicide. Surely, this was a perfect story ending. At this moment, a soldier gestured to Mrs. Verna not to worry, because the perfect story ending was not like this. When Dedran thrust his dagger at Dairan, suddenly, fierce flames erupted. Simultaneously, Medran burst through the door and subdued the soldier. Seeing Medran, Dedran immediately sensed trouble. Dairan slowly rose. "It's all over, Count Dedran." Seeing Dairan unharmed, Mrs. Verna's hanging heart finally relaxed. Seeing the supposedly poisoned Dairan speaking, Dedran realized he had fallen into their trap. Medran signaled Dedran to give up his futile resistance. As everything was about to be lost, Dedran reluctantly put down his weapon and attempted to explain his actions. All of this was just for self-defense, nothing more. Ellison had already anticipated that Dedran would not easily confess, so he had Medran fully prepared, even bringing the food Dairan was supposed to have. "If what you say is true, eat it and prove your innocence." Hearing this, Dedran broke into a cold sweat, fully aware of the poison hidden in the food. Trembling, he picked up the bread, but in the next instant, he knocked all the food over and also spilled out what he called Verna's crimes. Dedran tried to use Verna as a shield before his death, betraying his own daughter without hesitation. At this point, Dairan interrupted him. "I don't know what you're talking about. Where's the evidence of that?" Dedran was instantly shaken with rage, cursing, "You despicable people." Immediately, he ordered the soldiers beside him to act. However, how could ordinary soldiers contend against a powerful magician, especially the 7th level great magician Medran? Medran calmly indicated, "There are some things that no one, whether a general, a noble, or even an emperor, can touch. So, it's time for this to end." Meanwhile, Darian had already led soldiers to surround the Count's mansion. "If anyone still wishes to resist, let them not see tomorrow's sun." Seeing this, Dedran still did not give up, trying to persuade Medran to spare him. However, Medran ignored him, and he could only rage powerlessly. In just a moment, all soldiers laid down their weapons and surrendered. The traitors of Grake were also controlled one by one. After things settled down, Ellison approached Mrs. Verna and released her bonds. Just as she was still stunned, Dairan stepped forward to ask if his mother was injured. However, Verna dared not meet meet Diane's eyes. Don't worry about me. I'm so thankful to God you're okay. Diane then asked why she would not meet his eyes. She felt guilty for putting Drake in jeopardy and for believing Dedran, embezzling the taxes. Verna felt deep remorse for her actions, hoping Diane would not forgive her. However, Diane did not blame her. He knew that none of this was her fault. He was angry, but more so, he was heartbroken. Angry that Verna had hidden everything and refused to tell him. Regardless, you should have told me about your situation. I believe Father would also support you because you are our family. So, please don't bow your head. Verna did not expect that her wrong decisions had caused Diane to endure so much. She finally understood that family was the most important. Meanwhile, at the Dedran city, Dedran, still imprisoned, continued to curse, his anger unquenched. At this moment, Dedran still harbored delusions of rising again, for he had backers in the palace. He claimed that once he was released, he would annihilate everyone who opposed him. Hearing this, Ellison coldly chuckled. Don't delude yourself anymore. You no longer have a chance. When Dedran saw Ellison able to walk on air, he broke into a cold sweat and asked, "Are you a mage sent by the Empire?" Ellison did not answer directly, only suggesting that he look back at his own castle. In his view, such a vast castle now seemed so fragile. Look how fragile the castle that you spent your whole life building really is. Dedran's eyes widened as he watched his castle fall to the ground. He could not believe this was possible. After the crisis in Drake was resolved, Diran invited all his friends to the Count's mansion for a long-awaited dessert feast. Mrs. Rain was full of anticipation, but Mr. Knoll seemed to have said something he shouldn't have, followed by a loud bang. Fortunately, this time without a frying pan. Rurin and Elena had never seen so many exquisite desserts before, and Mrs. Verna beside them could hardly conceal her surprise and joy. Just then, a voice interrupted everyone's merriment. To commemorate Drake's victory, there will be a special performance tonight. Everyone looked up, all faces filled with astonishment. Dedran's castle was actually floating in the air. As Ellison activated the magic, the castle gradually transformed into an energy sphere, and Dedran's lifelong efforts vanished in smoke. The more spectacular part followed. In an instant, the castle blossomed like fireworks in the sky, dispelling everyone's gloom. Verna's eyes brightened. Then she picked up the long-missed dessert, and tears of happiness couldn't stop flowing, because this was the best dinner of her life. With Ellison's help, everything finally came to a perfect conclusion. The Count Dedran affair was quickly concluded, and Mrs. Verna never expected that she could eat desserts carefree like before, because the castle in her heart had been completely destroyed. From now on, she would not avoid reality because of guilt. She had always had something buried in her heart, thinking she would never have the chance to say it, but now God had given her another opportunity to speak. Actually, her choice to marry Ridden was because she truly wanted to marry him. Diran heard everything and was very happy about this. On the other side, seeing his castle turn into fireworks, Dedran felt as if his heart had died, for he had devoted his life to it. He even gave up his own daughter. Meanwhile, Dariant completely cleaned up Drake's spies. At the same time, he was curious whether Medran was the only one Ellison had brought along. Ellison could only smile awkwardly, explaining that it was an emergency, so he had no choice but to do so. Does Duke Tamarin have any complaints? It turns out Porgo was initially confused, but after knowing that it was Ellison's doing, he dared not say more. If he knew there was a fireworks show tonight, he would surely come by himself. Dariant sighed, knowing Ellison had always been powerful, but he hadn't expected him to be so terrifying. It is quite a spectacular sight, just like a cannon fire. Ellison continues. After this night, Drake would welcome a brighter tomorrow. The next day, Ellison was stunned after waking up, not expecting that a better tomorrow would be a torrential downpour. Ment and Miltine were still working hard when, in the next instant, Miltine was blown away by the strong wind. When Ellison learned of the situation, he immediately prohibited their outdoor activities, as it was not suitable to work outside in a storm. So, he arranged for them to help in the restaurant, as there were still many customers. Ellison then helped Rurin wipe the rain off her body to prevent her from catching a cold. Miltine looked expectantly at Mr. Ment. At that moment, a voice interrupted everyone. It's surprising that such a beautiful scene can exist in a restaurant. What a lovely sight. Ellison then looks up to see who it is. It turned out to be his old friend Venin. What's the menu for today? Moments later, a steaming bowl of chicken soup noodles was served in front of Venin. Having a warm meal in a storm might be one of life's happiest things. As the two chatted, Rurin interrupted them, holding a towel, indicating Ellison to help her dry off. Venin, standing beside them, had a complex look in his eyes, seemingly hiding many stories. Then, Venin poured himself a glass of wine and asked, "Have you ever made a decision that you regretted for a lifetime?" Upon hearing this, Ellison was suddenly stunned. Venin continued, "If time could be reversed, a decision you would never make again, that kind of decision that breaks your heart every time you close your eyes." He then sighed, "You and your wife seem to get along very well." This left Ellison dumbfounded again, and he quickly explained, "We're not what you think." Emboldened by the alcohol, Venin revealed a story buried in his heart. "Even though I'm alone now, I once loved someone. It's been 30 years since, and I can never forget the name Meal." After listening, Ellison asked, "Since you've loved her for 30 years, why haven't you confessed your feelings to her?" Venin gave a bitter smile, "Because I made a decision I regret the most. Back then, Ellison. When our love was just blossoming, I thought liking each other was enough to be together. It wasn't until we grew up and she started talking about marriage that I came to my senses. Her family had already arranged everything for her. Thus, Venom finally gathered the courage to tell her and arranged to meet her outside the city. But that evening, they did not meet each other because that night, a fierce dragon suddenly appeared in the sky. Faced with this sudden event, Venom was scared and fled. Later, he heard that Meal was safe, but he never had the courage to find her again. Feeling he was a coward, Ellison continued to listen. I heard that Meal, who I haven't seen for 15 years, returned to Drake City a while ago. After speaking, Venom put down a few copper coins, knowing no one could understand his feelings now. Nowadays, he doesn't even have the courage to look up because he's afraid he might meet Meal again. Just then, Ruren pretended to cough. That person over there, please take good care of your wife. Venom then wears his cloak and says, while leaving, take care of her so that even if she leaves tomorrow, you won't have any regrets. At night, Ruren was sleeping soundly. Ellison looked at her sleeping, sighing. Missing someone for 15 years? Has it been 150 years for Ruren? When he came to his senses, he couldn't help but mock himself for daydreaming. It seems he needs to find out more tomorrow. The next day, he found Mrs. Rain. When Mrs. Rain heard that Ellison was looking for Meal, she was very happy. It turns out Meal has a very friendly relationship with the neighbors, but recently her expression has become worried, always with a look of sadness, which made Ellison curious. Rain then continues. She also mentioned a strange question. Have you ever made a decision that you regretted for a lifetime? Upon hearing this, Ellison was suddenly stunned. Wasn't this what Venom had said? Mr. Venom, the one who manages the orchard. He realized there must be a misunderstanding, so he decided to learn more about Meal. Then, Mrs. Rain told Ellison everything she knew. She had chatted with Meal, who immediately noticed that Mrs. Rain was not a local of Drake, as Meal had lived in this city since she was a child. And indeed, as Meal had said, Mrs. Rain and Mr. Knoll had come here to escape the war. What made Mrs. Rain curious was why Meal suddenly left Drake 15 years ago. It turns out there was someone Meal could never forget. 15 years ago, they could have seen each other one last time, but unexpectedly, a fierce dragon appeared in the sky. Faced with the powerful dragon, she fled that place. Later, she learned of Venom's whereabouts from a flower vendor, which made her feel devastated. She didn't expect that her fear had driven her from that place, and since then, she no longer had the face to see Venom again. Ellison learned of the misunderstanding between the two and sorted out the sequence of events. Mrs. Rain was shocked after hearing it. The person Meal spoke of in the orchard was Venom. They both went to the agreed meeting place, but each fled separately when the dragon suddenly appeared. Both thought they had abandoned each other, causing this misunderstanding that lasted for 15 years. Mrs. Rain felt it was extremely unfair to them. They had lived with guilt for so long, all because of a misunderstanding. Ellison quickly thought of a solution. Just then, Ellison found Mr. Venom working in the orchard and told him that he had arranged a meeting with Meal and then handed him a magnifying glass to give as gift to Meal. They would reunite at the place they had once planned to meet tonight. Hearing this, Venom was suddenly flustered. Ellison reminded him that no one is without mistakes, nor can anyone predict the future, but one should not run away from the past again. You shouldn't let the same mistake happen twice. Time quickly moved to the evening, and Mr. Venom walked toward the agreed spot with a heavy heart, his mind swirling with countless questions. He was worried that Meal might not come to meet him, but he knew this was his last chance, so he refused to give up. Thus, Venom arrived at the place they had agreed on long ago, and this 15-year delayed date was finally about to begin. Reunions sometimes serve to end an outdated journey, and sometimes to pick up past regrets. Both harbored a secret they wanted to confess to each other, and Mr. Venom decided not to run away anymore. Whether it was reprimand or condemnation, he had already missed one opportunity. In the next moment, both simultaneously apologized, regretting that they hadn't met all those years ago. Leaves drifted by with the wind, adding a touch of awkwardness to the atmosphere. It turned out that neither had shown up at the agreed time for their meeting. Upon learning the ultimate truth, they couldn't help but shed tears of joy. Seeing the two reconcile, Mrs. Rain was also happy for them and was curious why Ellison hadn't told them the truth earlier. Ellison responded with a smile. It was a simple misunderstanding. Isn't it better that they resolved it themselves? After all, it troubled them for a full 15 years. With that, the two walked hand in hand back to Drake City. A few days later, they came to the restaurant together, where Venom decided to sell his long-cherished orchard to Ellison, who bought it at the highest price. Clearly, Vernon wanted to build a new house, because he had hesitated for 15 years, and this time he didn't want to leave any regrets. Now with the orchard, Ellison had just the right place to build a village for the dwarves. Ruren also agreed, as she didn't like the idea of the dwarves sleeping in the lair. At that moment, she really wanted to invite Ellison to live with her, but didn't know how to bring it up. Ellison, noticing her hesitation, suddenly remembered Vern's words. Flustered, he asked, "Should I move into the dragon's lair once the construction is finished?" Hearing this, Ruren was instantly delighted. "Are you serious?" She then insisted that Ellison couldn't back out. A season has passed. The construction of the cave was already 70% complete. Hearing this, Ruren is pleased. "Good work," Ellison said while serving Gultazar his meal. "We've still not paid back our debts. You even gave us land to build the dwarves dwarven village. At this moment, Miltine reminded Ellison that due to an increase in the Barinrix population, they should also expand a barn. Ellison agreed with her suggestion, indicating that another hiring fair might be needed. Meanwhile, the aroma drifting from the restaurant attracted the attention of a brother and sister who hadn't eaten decent food in a long time. They came to the restaurant holding a recruitment poster of Ellison's, asking if there was a chance to apply for a job. Seeing this, Ellison was surprised because that was a flyer he had discarded not long ago. "Where did you find this?" Hearing this, Lindy became somewhat nervous, and the two hesitated to explain clearly. Ellison signaled them not to be nervous and informed them that the restaurant was preparing to make new recruitment posters. "Now we can talk while eating." Considering the cold weather, Ellison prepared some warm food for them. He first seared the wooka meat in butter to lock in the flavors. Then, in another pan, he fried onions, garlic, and mushrooms. Once they started to color, he added tomatoes and potatoes, followed by some spices, beer, and the wooka meat to cook together, without needing to add MSG to ensure the flavors remained pure. However, Ellison couldn't help but sprinkle a little MSG in the end. After simmering on low heat for a while, the delicious wooka stew was ready. Lindy incredulously scooped up a piece of meat with a spoon, not knowing how long it had been since he last ate meat. Ellison signaled them to help themselves, as he had cooked enough portions. The siblings then devoured the meal voraciously. With each bite, the wooka meat was chewy yet exceptionally tender inside, and the rich sauce made each bite spread warmth throughout their bodies. They immediately thanked Ellison, as this was the tastiest food they had ever eaten since birth. Then, Ellison asked why they wanted to work here. Lindy stated that he and his sister greatly enjoyed working with animals and felt confident they could handle the job. Afterwards, Ellison asked Elena's opinion, and she immediately sensed they were hiding something else, making the siblings nervous again. Lindy instinctively covered his own hands. Ellison reminded them that lying would cost them their job opportunity. Reluctantly, they unwrapped the bandages around their hands, revealing the clear marks of handcuffs on their wrists. This revelation shocked everyone present. "Are you guys criminals?" Matt wanted to explain, but Lindy stopped her, saying, "No." Lindy apologized for hiding their identity, but he stated they meant no harm. Knowing that hiring them might bring unwanted trouble, he turned to leave. Matt hoped he would tell Ellison the truth because they are not like criminals. Lindy responded, "Our identity as criminals can never be changed. Although I make no excuses for what happened then, I do not regret the decisions I made." Just then, Matt asked indifferently, "Don't you regret not finishing the food?" This stunned Lindy, who hesitated for a moment and then laughed, saying, "Perhaps a little. Under those circumstances, we really didn't have the opportunity to finish it." In the evening, Ruren wondered why they weren't selected, and Ellison knew they seemed to have a story to tell, but if they don't explain clearly, there's nothing I can do. Moreover, rashly letting them join might put Met and Miltine in a dilemma, so we need to understand the situation clearly. Indeed, it's hard to find subordinates. Ruren agrees. Just then, Ellison noticed the spices were gone, and he immediately placed a gold coin into the magic circle. Accompanied by the release of magic, products from the real world appeared before him. But this time, for some reason, he felt unusually tired, different from usual. Before he could react, he lost consciousness and collapsed heavily to the ground. This scene left Ruren completely at a loss. Amid Ruren's constant calls, Ellison finally regained consciousness, reassuring Ruren not to be nervous, stating it was just a depletion of his magical power. However, Ruren wasn't so easily fooled. She retorted, "But you're a level 9 mage." To allow Ellison to rest properly, Ruren said she could take over the tasks. Ellison felt relieved by this, but also mentioned there indeed was one thing she needed to do. Moments later, Ruren muttered to herself, "I did tell him I could do anything, but how could he ask me to cook?" Meanwhile, the siblings were still looking for work, but people in town would reject them due to the criminal marks on them. That's why they chose to go to the restaurant in the suburbs. They've been through a lot and are no longer concerned about others' opinions. But a cat nearby was frightened by them, its fur standing on end. It turned out they had stolen the cat's bowl of food, making Matt feel like they had become real criminals. But the next second, Lindy suddenly froze because the cat cried pitifully after having its bowl taken away. Seeing this, Matt asked her brother to return the plate. Just then, a man caught their attention. They spotted the figure of construction supervisor Radanda. Unexpectedly, at this time, he still wouldn't let the siblings go. Lindy was furious, grinding his teeth, ready to confront Radanda, but Matt stopped him, as getting caught again would mean more than just 2 years in prison. 2 years ago, when Great City was under construction supervisor Radanda was in charge of supervising the construction. He was lecherous, liked to take advantage, and specifically bullied the workers privately. Once, he was harassing a woman when the siblings interrupted him. At that time, building number 3 on the site collapsed, and some workers have sustained injuries. The woman's family was at that site, so she hurriedly ran out. At that moment, Radanda was very angry and scolded the workers for not doing their jobs properly. The workers argued that they followed strict construction standards, but the supporting pillars suddenly broke, suspecting there was a problem with the building materials. Faced with their questioning, Radanda immediately ordered Lindy to be arrested and began beating him. Radanda believed, even if he embezzled the workers' material money, the workers couldn't do anything to him. Seeing this, Matt stepped forward to plead for forgiveness, but Rat Anda revealed a sinister smile, his gaze becoming lewd. If Matt was willing to repay his wounded heart, he could let the siblings go. Hearing this, Lindy became enraged, broke free of his restraints with all his might, and rushed at Rat Anda, punching him so hard that his face swelled up. But that wasn't enough. Lindy's anger was not appeased, and even the guards couldn't stop him. Afterward, the siblings were sent to prison and were incarcerated for 2 years. Matt urged Lindy to calm down, while on the other side, Rat Anda was also visibly angry. Because they didn't find Lindy and Matt, Rat Anda became enraged and immediately slapped one of his subordinates nearby, who dared not speak out. Just then, Elena was returning from Ellison's restaurant and happened to be encountered by Rat Anda. He immediately harbored malicious intentions and approached to detain Elena under the guise of questioning. On the other side, due to Ellison absorbing the energy of the essence crystal, his magic was interrupted during spell casting. Now he must stop absorbing from the source. After all this, Ellison lay down to rest. Looking forward to the midnight snack Ruren was preparing for him. Ellison had great faith in her cooking skills. After all, Ruren had watched him cook for many years. However, he had a nagging feeling of foreboding. After Ruren's efforts, a secret recipe for scrambled eggs with tomatoes was finally ready, but the result was less than satisfactory. It didn't look like scrambled eggs at all. Ruren knew that if Ellison ate this, he might die on the spot. Suddenly, she thought of Elena, feeling that if she could add a bit of healing magic from the elf, the problem might be solved. But the issue was she couldn't locate Elena because she doesn't smell like anything. Quickly, Ruren thought of another remedy, which was to buy a portion from the restaurant next door. But just as she was about to go out, she hesitated. Because Ellison had always taken care of her, and now that it was her turn to take care of him, she felt helpless. Meanwhile, the unprepared Elena was quickly captured. It turns out that Rat Anda had visited Elena's clinic before, but not for medical treatment. "I'm looking for someone, you see. As long as you answer me well, I'll send you on your way," Rat Anda asks while putting down Elena's hood. "If you can't answer, I personally look forward to that much more." "Lindy and Matt, do you know where those siblings are?" Hearing their names, Elena was very shocked. Meanwhile, the subordinate of Rat Anda thought, "This perverted bastard, how would an elf know 2 people who just got out of prison? There's no way she would know." Unexpectedly, Elena answered that she knew where they were, which leave Rat Anda and his subordinate dumbfounded. This time, while he and his subordinates were not paying attention, Elena secretly cast a spell that made Rat Anda and his subordinate take a step back. She then took the chance to escape. Enraged, Rat Anda decided to show the elf just how formidable he was. Just as he reached out to grab Elena again, a fist suddenly slammed into his face. It was Lindy who had struck. He could no longer tolerate the villain's actions, and Matt stood by her brother, supporting his decision. Seeing that the situation was bad, Rat Anda blew his whistle to call for reinforcements. Soon after, 3 thugs appeared. They were the underlings of Roman, the gangster leader of Grake. Meanwhile, Ruren is knocking at the butcher shop of Mr. Knoll. Mrs. Rain was woken up by the noise outside and felt very puzzled, not knowing what was happening outside. When she opened the door, she found Ruren there looking helpless. This was the closest place with a familiar scent coming from it. "Could you tell me the location of Elena's clinic?" On the other side, Lindy is getting beat up. Facing Roman, Lindy had no chance to fight back. Despite being badly beaten, he still chose not to compromise. Seeing this, Matt stepped forward to help, but she too was quickly subdued by the gangster leader, letting his subordinate hold her while Lindy crouched from pain. Rat Anda watched everything with satisfaction. Roman then asked if Rat Anda wanted them to beat them up more. Rat Anda then ordered them to continue beating Lindy and not touch the sister because she will be useful in many ways. Lindy then grabs Roman's foot, begging to let the others go. Seeing this, Roman is enraged and continues beating up Lindy. Seeing this, Matt cries while shouting his brother's name. Elena rushed forward to treat Lindy, but faced with the numerous enemies, she was powerless. Lindy was still being beaten up. He asks himself, what did he do so wrong to deserve something like this? Just then, they heard a voice coming closer. "Found you." After asking Mrs. Rain, Ruren hurried back to the restaurant, unexpectedly encountering them on the way. Finally, Elena saw a glimmer of hope. At this moment, Roman was trembling with fear, every pore on his body telling him to run. He knew the girl before him was extremely dangerous, and if he didn't bow his head, he might lose his life. Before Ruren could even speak, Roman quickly released them. This left Rat Anda very puzzled. Elena immediately took the chance to heal Lindy. When Rat Anda looked back, he found his men had already fled. Unexpectedly, he directly made a move to grab Ruren, but in the next instant, his arm was twisted around twice and a half, followed by a scream of agony. Seeing this, everyone around trembled with fear, but Ruren didn't have time to care about these people, as Ellison was waiting for her. When Ruren arrived, Elena immediately proceeded to Ellison's treatment. After Elena's treatment, Ellison's health had improved significantly. Ellison thanked her, remarking, "Thank you, you helped me again. That's a relief." Then she thought, "I poured in all of my mana. Just how much magic power does he have?" At that moment, Ruren was staring at Elena. Then she called her by name. It was the first time Ruren had taken the initiative to call her by name, and she appeared very shy, but still thanked Elena. This surprised both of them, as it was the first time they had heard Ruren thank someone. Just then, Ellison noticed noticed the siblings behind the door. Then, they told Ellison what had happened. Initially, Radanda had come for them, but inadvertently involved others. Ellison signaled them not to blame themselves too much, as Radanda was notorious for cutting corners in construction. But Ellison was curious why they hadn't explained earlier, which shocked Lindy. It turned out that Lindy knew it was illegal to hit someone, but he didn't regret doing so, and thus felt it unnecessary to explain anything to others. Then, Ellison smiled and asked if they have a place to stay for the night. Then he pulled out a gold coin, puzzling Lindy. "Why would you give this to us?" "Why? That's because you'll be working at the ranch starting tomorrow." Hearing this, the siblings were very happy. Then they repeatedly thanked him, as they would no longer have to go hungry. The next day, Lindy and Matt arrived at the farm in clean clothes. Miltine welcomes them, but she is a bit embarrassed when they call her senior. Mr. Ment then noticed the chain marks on Lindy's wrist. Although Mr. Ment dislikes criminals, he said if it were him, he wouldn't hesitate to beat up Radanda as well. These remarks made Lindy happy. At this moment, Ellison's magical power had mostly recovered, and he had greater control over the essence of magic. Just then, he noticed Ruren fixating on something, which made him curious. It turned out that Ruren was watching the customers. Hearing this, Ellison thought, Ruren is interested in other beings? What's happening? She even thanked Elena last time. Is there something wrong? Just then, Ruren noticed human women often wore shiny objects, which she didn't understand. While dragons also like treasures, there was nothing in her mother's cave. Then, Ellison explained to Ruren, humans do this as a way to express their emotions, just like how Venom gives jewelry to Meal. But Ruren still didn't quite understand. Meanwhile, a voice interrupted them. Dyran brought good news. Radanda had been confirmed for multiple crimes and would likely spend the rest of his life in prison, and his guards had also exposed his other misdeeds. He said that Dedran was the one behind Radanda, and even though Count Dedran was dragged away, Ratanda still continued his actions. Then, Ellison asked Dyran if he was free in 3 days because he had a secret plan. Upon learning this, Dyran said he would definitely attend. 3 days later, and Ellison went to find the dwarves. However, he wasn't there to rush the construction timeline, but to bring sausages and beer to the dwarves, as today was a day of remembrance. Mr. Knoll and Mrs. Rain also went to Ellison's restaurant for the event, along with other farm staff. This made Ruren very curious about what was on those plates. Ellison is shocked, asking, "You really don't know what today is?" Then, Ellison welcomed everyone's arrival, as he had prepared a little game for the evening. "What do I have in my mouth?" Quiz. After explaining the rules, Miltine was the first to go. Ellison then started to serve the food to Miltine. When Ellison saw the food, he was momentarily stunned, and then the game started. After a moment of tasting, Miltine feels like there's something squirmy inside. In a panic, she vomited the food. Wrong. Miltine is disqualified. She was actually eating marshmallows. Miltine had never eaten this one before, so she didn't know. Ellison then said that it's food that came from a very far away land. Unexpectedly, Mr. Ment really likes the taste of marshmallows. Next up was Mr. Knoll, who unexpectedly ate a chili and instantly turned into a fire-breathing dragon because he was very sensitive to spice. But Mrs. Rain was different, picking up a chili and munching on it. The third to go was Ruren. Hearing her name, Ruren was momentarily stunned. "Am I participating too?" Before she could react, Ellison blindfolded her and gave her the food. Because she had to participate in this game, Ruren confidently thought, "Don't forget, I'm a black dragon. My senses are several times stronger than humans." Then, she can fell a soft bread with some sweet cream on it. It was also mixed with fruit. Quickly, Ruren thought of the answer. It's cake. Immediately, everyone came forward to congratulate her. Specifically, it was Ruren's birthday cake. Today was her 800th birthday, and everyone was happy to celebrate with her while she was completely unaware of it, having forgotten her own birthday. This made Ruren blush instantly. Living so long, it was the first time someone had thrown a birthday party for her. Seeing her shy demeanor, Ellison was also very pleased. Just when he thought Ruren was about to express her gratitude, she did the opposite. "Don't think I'm going to say thank you, you little rascals." Everyone was amused by her comment. Then, Ellison took out a gift from his bag, an earring that he had the dwarves craft especially for Ruren. He had noticed that Ruren had been observing human earrings intently in the days leading up to her birthday, so he decided to give her this gift on her special day. Ellison personally helped her put them on, marking the first time Ruren had ever received such a thing. Looking at herself in the mirror with the earrings on, she felt happy inside, but didn't know how to express her feelings. At that moment, she wondered why human women acted so strangely when receiving gifts, and now she seemed to understand the feeling. Ruren showed a smile that had been long absent. The party continued, and next up was Mrs. Rain, who was also disqualified, as Mr. Knoll had intentionally misled her that she is eating a bug, which resulted in him getting a lesson with a frying pan from Mrs. Rain. Then it was Lindy's turn, but he too failed to guess the food. Thus, everyone spent a pleasant evening at Ellison's restaurant. As time moved quickly into the night, Ruren thanked Ellison again, although her manner was still somewhat awkward because this was her last birthday before coming of age. Meanwhile, snowflakes suddenly began to drift outside, and Ellison invited Ruren to watch the year's first snowfall together. At that moment, Ellison remarked how quickly time flew, which puzzled Ruren as they had only been there for a year. Ellison explained that a year might be short for dragons, but for humans, a year was a considerable amount of time. Although he had absorbed the heart of an ancient dragon, no one could guarantee that it had life-extending effects. Just then, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Ellison suggested that Ruren make a wish. Watching the brilliant meteor light up the night sky, Ruren silently made a wish. She wanted to be with Ellison for longer. Ellison was curious about her wish, but Ruren wouldn't tell him, saying, "It won't come true if I say it out loud." At the Black Dragon Palace, a man barged through the palace doors, cursing, "How much longer will you tolerate that arrogant person? Is a promise to a mortal that important?" This man was Nis, known among the Black Dragons for his unruly nature, not believing a human could be that significant. But Elder Dihegma said little, understanding why Nis was so upset. It was for Ruren. The reason Ruren had left the dragonkind was that they had disappointed her and driven her away. But now they wanted to bring Ruren back, not out of concern for her, but because in the Great Dragon War, most of the young mother dragons had perished. "So what are you trying to say? Do you want me to force Ruren back here?" Nis showed a fierce look. "If the Elder permits, I wouldn't mind causing that mortal some trouble." The Elder sighed helplessly, knowing that Ellison's sparing Nis's life was already an act of tolerance. Nis was so bold because he had never truly faced Ellison, and the Great Elder would not agree to the Black Dragons stirring up trouble. Just then, Nis thought of an interesting idea. Elder Dihegma did not comment, merely stating that he had never mentioned such a thing. Hearing this, Nis knew that Elder Dihegma was actually on his side, so he decided to create some justifiable trouble for Ellison. Meanwhile, at the Mount Miliorek North Pole, Ruren was curious, asking, "Aren't we here to pick something up? Mushrooms. How can mushrooms grow in such a place?" Ellison then explained that these were not ordinary mushrooms, but an extremely rare variety. It turns out that Ellison had overheard a conversation in the restaurant about a farm family who, while steering their wuba, discovered some black mushrooms after the animals started digging in the ground. When the farmers sold these mushrooms, they were bought by the palace at a high price, and the farmer earned a significant amount of gold coins. Ellison speculated that these were not ordinary mushrooms, but truffles or a similar rare variety because truffles usually grow deep underground and are hard to find. Ruren understood why Ellison had brought her here, jokingly saying, "So I'm just here to work?" However, Ruren didn't know what truffles smelled like, which left Ellison at a loss for words. After all, how could they search for truffles if Ruren didn't know the scent? Was their trip going to be in vain? Just then, there was a commotion nearby. A group of fierce goblins was attacking a white yeti. Although the yeti was visibly scared, it bravely defended the cave behind it. Faced with the goblins' aggression, it chose to fight back. However, outnumbered, the yeti was soon overwhelmed. At this critical moment, a shield spell protected the yeti. It turns out it was Ellison casting a spell. Ellison and Ruren noticed the fight and told the goblins to stop. The goblins, still not giving up, lost their grip on their weapons when Ruren released a killing intent and then hastily fled. Ellison could only smile awkwardly, as these goblins really had no foresight. Just then, the yeti leapt up and then bowed several times to Ellison and Ruren, mumbling something. Ellison thought that the scene felt somewhat familiar. As a black dragon, Ruren naturally understood what it was saying. It wanted to sincerely thank Ellison for saving its life. It wanted to repay them for their kindness. The two entered the cave, and two young yetis were playing together. Seeing this, Ellison concluded that the yeti didn't let the goblins in because there were two young yetis inside. At that moment, Ellison was also curious about what the yeti would give him in thanks. Just then, the yeti approached, holding some dark objects. Ruren, with her keen nose, already smelled a strange scent. "What's that smell? That's not a treasure." Ellison looked at the object with delight. "You're wrong, Ruren. This is definitely a treasure." Meanwhile, on the other side, Nis gathered a few black dragons, intending to teach Ellison a lesson. "I will bring Ruren back to the Holy Land." They suspected Nis did this because of Ruren, as he had been looking for a mate. Although he wouldn't admit it, he felt that dragons should belong to dragons. He also got support from an elder, but they were still hesitant because they had signed a treaty forbidding attacks on humans unless their personal safety was threatened. The elders specifically warned the black dragons to stay away from Ellison, as he was not someone even dragons should provoke. Just then, a voice interrupted them, suggesting he knew a red dragon near Grake that could be used to execute their plan. Back to the Yeti cave, Ruren, seeing these for the first time, was puzzled. Could these really be edible? But for Ellison, it was a different matter. These were exactly the truffles they were looking for. Seeing Ellison's satisfied expression, the Yeti also breathed a sigh of relief. However, Ruren thought they smelled bad and casually threw them away. This stunned Ellison. "Stop it! Do you know how expensive they are?" Just then, Ellison thought, if the Yeti could find enough truffles to feed on, that meant there were many more truffles to be found. Looking at the clueless Yeti, Ellison asked Ruren to translate some words for him because he thought of a solution that would benefit everyone, making the Yeti the guardian of Ruren's underground palace. Hearing this, the Yeti is surprised and doesn't know how to respond. The next second, the Yeti was very willing. After all, it was cold here, and there wasn't much food, and it had to take care of two cubs. Meanwhile, at the Serena's lair, Serena was idly sitting on her throne. Apart from that guy who scared her last time, no one else had visited her. Ellison had not expected her to be so poor, so he hadn't planned to take any advantage from her. Ruren even mocked her place as looking like a dilapidated hut, but Serena was helpless, as she was indeed very poor. After the mockery, Ruren left arm in arm with Ellison because they had their own restaurant to attend to. Even though the restaurant isn't as spacious as this lair, I've never once felt frustrated, Ruren teased. Serena wasn't sure when she would see them again to pass the time, which wouldn't make this place seem so empty. Just then, her thoughts were interrupted by a voice, and then a man appeared before her. Looking at him, Serena felt anger starting to surge within her as it was her ex-boyfriend, Jard. Serena was not welcoming, as she had already been warned about him, but shameless Jard suggested starting over. If you don't mind, I'd like to spend the rest of my life with you. Serena was well aware of his nature and knew he was up to no good. The next instant, she transformed into her dragon form, sensing that Jard had not come alone. This impressed Jard. You're still so sharp. Before Serena could react, a group of black dragons had her surrounded. They began attacking her simultaneously, which put her in a tough position. Although she was prepared to defend herself, she was outnumbered. What she didn't expect was that her ex-boyfriend would stand on their side. Meanwhile, Jard took advantage of Serena's distraction to cast a control spell on her, which infuriated her. However, Nis didn't give her a chance to react, attacking her from behind. Meanwhile, on the other side, Gultazar is looking up, confused. So you're saying this monster is a guard for the lair? That's right, they're called Ruruns. It turns out that Ellison brought the Yeti family to Ruren's cave and the truffles as a reward for helping them. Ruren was puzzled about this. So, how do we prepare the truffles? Ruren genuinely asked because she didn't know how to prepare these truffles. These ingredients had a very strong aroma and could change the taste of any dish, making it feel different to eat. So, when Ellison returned to the restaurant, he added truffles to the dishes, and everyone enjoyed their meal except Meltine, Mr. Knoll, and Ruren, who didn't like the taste. Ellison was stunned, realizing they all had mixed reactions about the food, and concluded that he wouldn't be able to put it on the regular menu and will be serving truffles to special customers. Meanwhile, at Serena's lair, when the smoke cleared, Serena was gone. She had prepared a spatial teleportation circle in advance and used it to escape. Seeing this, Jard panicked. If she goes back to complain, we're done for. But Nekwa signaled him not to worry. I tracked the mana flow of this lair, and the other end of the teleportation circle is in Grake City. Then, he signaled to Nis what to do next. Nis smirked slightly. So it takes us directly to Grake City. Looks like there's no need for us to move there ourselves. You're sure that the dragon that ran away doesn't have anyone to ask for help? Hearing this, Jard felt nervous but answered, I'm sure she could not teleport to the castle, and Serena has always been a loner among red dragons. Hearing this, Nekwa smirked. We've seen how you enslaved humans just like we did. Nis gestured that he was not interested in Jard's taste, and his goal was to make Ellison give in. He assures Jard that if they happen to make Ellison give in, he will turn a blind eye to the mess Jard made. That red dragon is seriously injured. The blood she lost is beyond recovery. She will eventually die. So, we just need to pin the blame on Ellison. A perfect way to justify things. As night fell and the restaurant was about to close, the doorbell suddenly rang. When they turned around, they were surprised to see Serena. Seeing the red dragon unexpectedly, Ellison was puzzled as they had no prior dealings. But out of courtesy, Ellison served her some food. Serena didn't say much, just ate quietly. Ruren, however, was not pleased. Whatever, just say what you're here for, she exclaimed while serving the water. Meanwhile, Serena noticed the earrings on Ruren's ears, and Ruren proudly introduced them. Ellison gave them to me as a gift. Although Serena said nothing, her expression showed envy, a feeling she had never experienced. Just then, Serena indicated that her time was short. Perhaps this would be her last meal. This puzzled both listeners, as they didn't understand what Serena meant. Then she continued eating, saying that she had always wondered if love truly existed or was just a momentary lie. She then raised her hand. Because of that, I dated several dragons, elves, and even humans. Thinking of that now, all of that was a waste of time. I only dated them because I was lonely, she said as tears continued flowing from her eyes, then snapped her fingers. As Serena dispelled the illusion magic, the wound on her back also became visible. Ellison was completely unprepared as he saw Serena suddenly collapsing. Both of them are completely shocked, unable to process what's happening. After Ruren's examination, it was found that Serena's wound was too deep and the situation was clearly not simple. At the same time, a teleportation portal opens, and several men suddenly appear outside Ellison's restaurant, obviously up to no good. Both of them felt the aura of the people outside and concluded they were all dragons. The whole situation was too coincidental, perfectly staged. Clearly someone was framing them. Now, the most important thing was to save Serena's life. As long as she could wake up, everything could be resolved. Ellison tells Ruren to take Serena to Elena to cure her. Before going, Ruren asks Ellison what about him. I'll need to welcome the guest after all. Then, Ellison tentatively asked them what had happened, but the red dragon named Vaint seemed prepared and pushed open the restaurant door directly. The bloodstains on the floor emitted the scent of a red dragon. Seeing this, Ellison invited them to have a proper conversation as they drank some tea, but the red dragons were not pleased and immediately started transforming into their dragon form. Seeing this, Ellison's eyes, I guess this is your choice then.